Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Contact Plus. I don't know if we can call it an episode. This is more like all right. Basic preparation is missing. Let me check if everything is working. It should be working. Let me know if it's not working in the chat. I don't know if anyone is watching. I don't think so for now, but um, yeah, it will be hopefully a nice listen to you because this episode or this rambling of mine is going to be about a multitude of topics, starting from burnout in the hobby, but then I guess I'm using this mainly as a nice and absorbing topic to move into uh, ways of fighting burnout, but mainly to talk about books, Horace Heresy books and other books that I delved into. Um, that I picked up this year, started picking up this year. I discovered Audible and I discovered audiobooks and 40K books, and I just want to tell you about it because it's fucking amazing. But yeah, first of all, I'm Tweak or Tomek, as you might know me, as you might recall. And as I said, we will start with the topic of burnout and some feels good stories and so on. And then we're going to move to a small presentation that I did on the books that I managed to read so far or listen to so far. As I mentioned, I picked up Audible early this year, and I've read or listened to. You might call it cheating, but I still consider it reading. 49 books this year only. So that's quite a lot. And I think I've got a flavor of the Black Library, or got a good taste of the Black Library books, and I can easily tell which ones are better, which ones are worse, which ones I recommend, and which ones uh, maybe it's not best to stay away from because I would never recommend something like that. I want people to test books themselves, but there are definitely books that I didn't find as easy to digest or intake than others, but we will get there. So let me start with the topic of burnout, I guess, because this is the primary focus of this uh, episode. So this is the third episode that we are doing, or Contact Loss is doing, about burnout. And I will link the two previous episodes that pertain to this because I consider them good pieces of work. We always devoted some energy and some time into preparing them. The first episode that we did was based uh, off a what do you call it? A survey. So we actually did a survey among 40K players that we know, competitive players, and so on, to find out what causes burnout and how people deal with burnout. So you can find it on our channel, but as I said, I'm going to link it in the description as well. It was a really interesting episode, some interesting data, some interesting insights. And then I think for the second one, I lost track. Maybe it was the same one, but definitely, I remember that we had an episode in which, or for which, we invited the Archon himself, so Scary, who had in the past suffered from burnout himself, and we invited him to also have a look at the results of our survey and to talk about his story. And then I contributed some of mine, and it was also a really good episode. So yeah, if you have time and if the topic is compelling and interesting, make sure that you check it out. But today, I wanted to talk about this as well because I have some thoughts of my own and some discoveries that I made, basically, that pertain to burnout in the hobby, and I guess the reasons why my burnout happened, and maybe this will be a lesson for you as well. So as I said, it's going to be my rambling about what caused my yet another break from the hobby. Hopefully, my lessons learned will become your lessons learned. So, about a year ago, I think more than a year ago, somewhere around October, I think, um, I had this feeling that I would like to. really get into competitive play. So I don't have the possibility to travel that much. Because I have a family, a small son with special needs. My wife who also has let's call them special needs. Two dogs, so it's not that easy to travel. We went to the WTC last year. We went to the LGT last year, uh, and that was already a lot. That was actually, honestly, I admire people who are pro players and travel every weekend to a tournament. I know already that I wouldn't be able to do that. And then I'm 38. So maybe it's down to age, but I'm not sure if at the age of 28, I would have been able to pull that off. Like the strain that it puts on you, maybe, I don't know. I haven't played in those events, I only covered them. Maybe covering them, the stress of delivering good content and so on, maybe this is something that contributed to the overall exhaustion and burnout. Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, I know that I wouldn't be able to like do this full time, and I wouldn't be able to do this every single weekend. So again, huge props to people like Joe from War Games Live, who travels to every tournament, or well, not every tournament, but travels every weekend to a different tournament, covers it live, spends hundreds of hours in front of his computer, in front of his monitors, making sure that the events get good coverage. I wouldn't be able to do that. That's too difficult. It requires too much attention. It's too time consuming. That's, yeah, it puts a strain on you. Um, and the same goes about playing. So after those two events last year, I already came back home tired. I mean, don't get me wrong. Watching people play, seeing those cool armies, seeing uh, well painted armies controlled by the best players in the world is something else. It's fantastic. You get home and you feel that you want to do something similar. That you want to achieve something similar. So I came back home with a feeling that maybe it's time to start investing some proper time into upskilling and so on and so on. So I joined multiple discords with the pro players, with the Polish national team, etc., etc. And I wanted to stay up to speed with the latest releases, with the latest tactics, with the latest list ideas, and so on and so on. I don't know if it was my poor skill or whether it was something else. Maybe it was the fact that I was or got exposed to like top level players. I'm talking Brian Sipe, I'm talking Nassim, I'm talking Pumba Typhus, and so on. My son. Plus, obviously, Joker, who is my partner in crime, but also we play together a lot to the point where sometimes we have enough of each other. Um, and all those games, or the great majority of those games, I lost. So it was, some of those losses were very close, some of those losses were, weren't very close. Um, but they started accumulating. And if you watched any of the previous episodes when I talked about like sorry, not burn down, burnout in the past, I did mention once or twice that when I started playing the game, I had a streak of 27 lost games with Drukari, um, which made me sell the army. And last year I reached something like a similar record, only playing like those top players and so on. And instead of drawing conclusions from that, instead of maybe learning and then applying what I learned at local tournaments and so on, I broke down. I gave up. I Everything was pissing me off. Everything about this hobby was pissing me off. I had this brilliant idea. My birthday is in November. So I had this brilliant idea that for my birthday, I was going to organize a small, really tiny tournament of like me and my three friends, so Joker, Vitalis, and Bufka, in Bufka's basement. And essentially, it was like supposed to be like a birthday tournament where I don't know, the best of us would get like a 200 PLN prize or something like that. Eh, and I was playing Death Guard at the time, which was frustrating because they weren't very good. but then people like Liam VSL and Pumba picked up Death Guard, and they started proving that games can be won with this army. I think this was around the time when they got their new detachment rules, the new contagions, and so on and so on. But I was very slow to adopt this and to adapt. I think Innes went to before that. Innes went to a tournament and won it with just like playing characters in the Land Raider or something like that. So this spoke to my ambition that yeah, okay, Death Guard can win, so I can win with Death Guard as well. Then I did an interview with a guy from I think Tryhard who also won a tournament with his Death Guard, and now the game was on. I needed to win something with Death Guard as well. So I entered that birthday tournament, and this happened uh, early December, around the time when the Necron Codex dropped. And the Necron Codex, whew, if you listen to our review of the Codex, or I don't know, maybe it was the year summary where we did like Mice and Joker and myself, from the point like talking about the meta from the point of view of a pro player, like a aspiring player and a scrub. So myself, Joker was the aspiring player, and I just complained about Necrons all the time because it hurt to play them. The book was so unmatched by anything else. And obviously, when I went to that birthday tournament, Vitalis, he has a Necron army. Of course, he picked the Necron army. He brought a list with two monoliths and raids, and he absolutely demolished me, which didn't set the mood for the whole tournament. And then I think I played one more game. I played against Bufka and his Space Wolves cavalry. Uh, I don't think that was the build that went to the WTC and so on, but still, I know he was playing that back then. And again, it was a little bit more even, but again, ended it in turn four with him almost tabling me. So at that moment, you know, I got a horrible migraine. I went home and I decided that it's over. I'm done. I cannot win anything. I'm giving up. And I did. And I did the worst thing that a person can do in this hobby. I sold my armies. So I decided that I'm giving this up for good because I also gave up. I had given up the hobby a year earlier. Um, Back then, I was playing, I think, Space Wolves, and I sold them. And then when I came back, I bought Tyranids and Death Guard. Yeah, that makes sense. So I sold the entire Space Wolves army that I had paid for painting for and so on, but I sold it. And then a year later, I did the same with the By the way, I just noticed your comment, so sorry if the internet connection is bad. I'm on cable. Maybe I'm touching the cables. I don't know. But anyway, I sold the armies, and th- I gave up the game. I gave up the game. I gave up the podcast as well. So it was funny because what you can see behind me on the wall, like this sign, I got this for Christmas from my wife. So, and I glued it to the wall. So, so it was funny because I gave up the podcast, but the sign was there to constantly remind me of its existence. And I really wanted to forget. Like, I really, really wanted to forget the hobby, the podcast. As I said, everything was pissing me off. I felt like our content was not, I don't know if content can be competitive, but I had the feeling that there are other people who started making content later than us, but were more successful. And again, it sounds petty, but when you are in a place like I was, I guess those are the thoughts that come to your head. So yeah, so there was, you know, Stat Check was very successful, Fireside was very successful, Aiden Smalley and God, I forgot the name of his partner in crime, but the Disgustingly Resilient podcast was very successful, and I was just jealous. I guess I'll be honest. I was jealous, and it contributed to the whole downfall of me back then. Um, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Like there was more to that downfall, I guess. But I sold everything, gave up everything, and yeah, around January we were still recording episodes, and I was supposed to, like, we already had an agreement with my son that one of the first pyras was going to happen, and we were supposed to do like a series of promotional episodes for pyra with Joker and so on. And at some point I just stopped and said, guys, I'm only doing this because I promised you I would be doing this, but if you ask me whether I want to, no, I'm done. And I felt like giving up forever, which essentially I announced, and I did. The forever part, as you can see, didn't work out, but more about that in a moment. So I gave up the hobby for good. I gave Joker like all the rights, privileges, everything to the podcast, to the Patreon, to everything, and I quit. And the void in my heart or in my soul or in my head was crazy. But then it was a good thing because it made me start thinking about stuff about, like, was it just a game? Was it just a podcast? Was it something else? And it turned out, so I came to this realization that it was just a layer because there was something beneath it. And I came to the realization that, like, the hobby was frustrating because it was not working out. It was supposed to be giving me relief for stuff, but it wasn't. But I needed relief because I was suffering somewhere else, and it was not the hobby. It was something else. And after a big, hard think, I came to the conclusion that the problem isn't the game. The problem is my job. So, for the last 4 years, uh, like, if you start counting December backwards, like last December, I had been a manager for 4 years, and it's funny because it's something that I had always wanted to do. It's something that was my ambition ever since I started working in one of the companies that I had been employed for. Because I started at the help desk as a help desk agent, and then seeing my manager at work, he inspired me, and I wanted to become like him. So managing people, leading people was, maybe the dream is too big, but was an ambition. And this ambition came to fruition, I think, or it had come to fruition 6 years later. And I became a manager, and that worked for 4 years. 4 years of supporting other people, which was great. That was the reason why I became the manager. I wanted to support other people in their job. Um, it was my ambition to show people that the department where we are working can be a trampoline to their success, and that they can obtain knowledge. It was like an IT department. I'm not IT myself, but I managed people who were specialists, and that was sufficient. Mm, but they had very low self-esteem, and they thought that they were stuck, or they would be stuck at that job forever. So it was my task, and I realized that consequently for 4 years, was to convince them that that department is only the beginning, and I can help them to develop their careers. And I invested so much energy into that I essentially forgot about myself. So what had been happening for, I guess, definitely the last 2 years of, or the second half of me being in that role, was every winter, or like every autumn, when, I don't know, October, September, late September, early October started kicking in, I would start feeling down. And this was on one hand because of the weather, because it was dark or getting dark quicker. It was more depressing, becoming grayer and grayer. Poland at that time is not really the most appealing time or place in the world. So if you live in Poland, you know. And it was also the time when big companies and big corporations, like the one where I used to work, uh, when they would do end of year appraisals. So if you work in a big company like the one I used to work for, and you have your end of year review or something like that, your grade is decided around the break of October and November, and then the grade is announced at the end of December or something like that. So end of year appraisals are a bitch for the managers, and for me especially because I used to work in like a very multi-cultural team, and like I had peers all over the world who were managing teams like myself, and it felt like every year when we were approaching the end of year appraisal, it felt like an arms race. So maybe it was me, maybe it was in my head, but every single year when we were doing the end of year, and we had to do it every year. So every single year it felt like I needed to come prepared, well armed, with arguments, with ways of convincing other managers and my boss that my employees deserve the grades or the ratings that I prepared for them. And it was a hard fought battle every single time. Like the last year probably wasn't, but it was a hard fought battle. So every single time I needed to prove, I needed to convince. It was like biting and tearing and making compromises and so on. If you've ever managed people and had to go through that in a big company, you probably understand what I'm talking about. So um, so yeah, so it was a hard time. Plus, in the last year of my career as a manager, I applied for a directorial role and I didn't get it. Uh, and the person who became my boss, who got the role, we didn't see eye to eye very much. So yeah, like if you put all those things together, that that last year of me being in the managerial position wasn't the best. I wasn't in the best place. And then coming back to 40K, mm, normally you would go and play with your friends, and you would seek, um, I don't know, fulfillment or some sort of compensation in like not financial, obviously, but like or maybe compensation is not the best word, but like reward or a way to get back at the world by winning at the table. I know it sounds trivial, but I like to imagine that most of you listeners know what I'm talking about. When you go to play, you want to win because winning gives you endorphins, it gives you serotonin, you feel good, and all the worries of the world go away for 10 minutes. So that's what I was seeking. But as I said, I was not getting it. So I blamed it all. It's not enough that I must win, others must lose. Yeah, sometimes it's that, especially Joker. So like, and that is another thing. Um, Playing against like Nassim and losing, or playing against um, Brian Sipe and losing, of course, on TTS, that wasn't that bad because I remember Brian was playing his Mega Nobs list. I was playing Crusher Stampede back then, which I was experimenting with, and he was going to a tournament and he wanted to see with his list that he had newly invented what the Tyranids do because he didn't really know Tyranids that well. Um, and I lost with Crusher, but it was like a very close game, so I didn't even feel that bad. But the worst thing in the world is when your best friend beats you. And I remember at the time, Joker would beat me to the ground mercilessly every single time. So that hurt double. And I guess this was also a trigger. And I must apologize to Joker. I did that many times, but I will apologize now again. Uh, I get triggered when Joker wins. It's horrible. But he plays meta armies. I play those shit armies just because I like them, and I'm convinced that I still can win. And very often it doesn't work. He wins, rightfully so, and then I get pissed off and I yell at the dice and I yell at tabletop simulator and so on. But I guess, or I like to think, most of us have been there at least once. I am there every second weekend. I'm joking, of course, but back then, a year ago, this was a thing that contributed to my pain. Uh, the best is to play with, yes, to play on one team. Teams is something completely different. Back then, again, I didn't consider playing in a team, or maybe there weren't that many opportunities. A year later, so today, Teams is in a different place as well. So back then, a year ago, well, I simply didn't have that many opportunities, and as I mentioned before, I couldn't travel that much. So this was also a blocker. But then I discovered the TTS team leagues, and I also, like, Sam Lemon is in the chat, or was. Sam invited me to one tournament, a team tournament with his Aussie friends, and that was probably one of the best team tournaments experiences ever, even though it was on TTS. And now I repeated that also in Try Hard, and I invited one of the guys from our local scene who is learning the game, and I just didn't care about the results. I captained the team. I didn't care about the results. I just wanted him to learn, for me to practice, and that was it. And that was probably the best approach. And this year I am far from burnout, but I'll get back to the story. So around the end of the year last year, I spoke to another director in the company, um, whether they needed my help in what they were doing. Turned out that yes, which gave me an opportunity to change the roles. And I gave up managing people. I came to the conclusion that this was taking too much of my energy. This was taking uh too much of my, I don't know, spirit. I gave up, and uh I became a single, like, sorry, we call it an individual contributor, and it was magical. Like, really, I felt relief. My new manager was great, is great still, because I'm still doing that, and I'm having the time of my life. And that was the realization that I came to, that it is incredible. And I mentioned this during one of the previous episodes. It's incredible how much your job affects everything else. And it may sound trivial, it may sound banal, but it is what it is. Like, at least for me, I'm in a new place, and I am a person who needs change from time to time. So I change armies fairly frequently. But if you ask our friends, me and my wife, we change stuff at home a lot. Like, we change furniture, we change the, I don't know, wallpapers, or we repaint the rooms, or we change the arrangements of furniture and so on, because we like change. And I guess I needed that at work as well, and it was so refreshing. But I also changed other things. I bought a new car, and I don't know, a bunch of other things as well. And that was probably the healthiest thing I have ever done, because ever since, I've been feeling great. So that helped a lot. Mm, and I was still trying to stay away from 40K. So uh, as I said, when you stay away from 40K, when you get into the hobby like I did, so playing online, playing computer games, reading some books, and then also creating a podcast and traveling around the world, big word, traveling around Europe to events to cover them. Um, when you give all that up, it creates a hole in your soul that needed to be filled in with something. And I started looking around for something new to do. And the thing that absorbed me the most, and the thing that I started enjoying the most, was um, books, essentially, but not just books, audiobooks. And I bought or created an account on Audible. And by the way, this is not like a promotional video for Audible or any other services, and it's not a promotional video for Black Library, but it is something that has been the the main part of main part of my life and my hobbying side throughout the year. So I guess this whole thing is was just a sort of backstory to how I got into Audible and stuff. Um, and I didn't start from like 40K books. I actually started with their originals, and when I was like 10 years ago, I think, when I was an English teacher, like an English tutor who would travel in his car from one student's house to another student's house and spent a lot of time in the car. I would listen to like my first audiobook ever, which was Harry Potter, all parts of Harry Potter read by Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry, who has an amazing voice, is just a wonderful person, but is also fantastic to listen to. And I discovered that Audible had the anthology of Sherlock Holmes, um, read by Stephen Fry from like the first to the last book, 40 hours of listening. And I was like, okay, let's see if it's good. I'll have something to do for 40 hours. And it's not like I, lied on the couch and just listen. I have two dogs, as I mentioned. So wherever I go for a walk, and I walk like 10 kilometers a day, at least when the weather is there and when it's warmer, I walk a lot. So it's a lot of time for listening. And I listen to that anthology of Sherlock Holmes, which by the way, in written form or recorded form, mind blowing. And I guess I came to the conclusion that I like adventure books and crime stories and so on. And yeah, I strongly recommend that anthology, whether you're a fan or not. If you're not, give it a listen. You'll maybe rediscover Sherlock Holmes. It's amazing. And I read or listened to a bunch of other books where Stephen Fry would be the voice, and I loved practically all of them. And then I was like, so, hmm, hmm. I wonder if Black Library is on here and whether they have any books available. And they do, or they did, and they still do. So, so I started looking up what they had, and obviously I decided that I'm going to start where I left off when I read the paper books, which was Horus Heresy. I read the first three books of the Horus Heresy in written form. So, and I guess I can I show you this? I think I can show you this. So let me switch screens. Let me do a screen sharing because I invested a little bit of time in creating a presentation, so I might as well just share this with you. Um, Not this way, the other way. I have two screens and they always get mixed up. There should be display settings. Okay, like so. And then back to StreamYard, whole screen. Let's go with this one so you'll see everything that I have on my screen, which is too bad. So yeah, let me just jump to my a little bit of notes. Most of this is improvised, but I have some notes to give this like a spine. I don't see the chat right now, by the way, so I'm sorry, but I'm going to get back to the chat if there is anything in the chat to go back to. So just to set the sort of context for how you can um, deal with uh, burnout with the hobby. So the whole backstory concludes with I got in too deep. I got in too deep. I treated this too seriously. I forgot where the fun was. I wanted to be competitive when it didn't work out for one reason or another. It pissed me off. And in the previous episodes that we recorded about burnout, we talk about multiple ways how you can deal with your burnout, whether it's organizing tournaments yourself or getting involved in some extra activities, for example, getting the new players into the hobby or helping the new players getting into the hobby, or teaching people how to paint, or just meeting with people to paint together, and anything that you do together with this in this hobby, I guess, is good. So I don't want to repeat all those things in this episode. So in this episode, I intend to tell you about how reading or listening to books about 40K got me back into the hobby, because this is essentially what happened. So what I'm showing on the screen right now, to those people who cannot, who are not watching, who are listening to this on Spotify or somewhere else, um, I'm showing you the titles that I have gone through. And if they don't have on the screen, if it doesn't say narrated by someone, it means that I read this in a paper, whatever you call it, paperback version. Um, the context for that is I read a lot, not only 40K, and I'm a big fantasy sci-fi fan, but like not to the point where when I'm that edgy of a fan that there are people on Reddit who say that if a book or if an author won like a Hugo Prize or the Nebula Prize or Arthur C. Clarke Prize or something, it's worth nothing. No, go and win those prizes first, and then you can say that. But and that the prizes got devalued and so on. I disagree. Uh, so I'm not that kind of fan that complains. I consume a lot of sci-fi and fantasy books and also adventure books. So it seems that Black Library books fit into my taste perfectly. And and this is like a conundrum, or it was a conundrum for me, because my previous experience with 40K books wasn't that good. Like I think um the first kind of text that I read in the setting was back in 7th edition, when I picked up the Corn Demonkin book. And if anyone has read that, like the descriptions in that book, because back then, like I just gave up the Drukhari that I failed 27 games with. Oh yeah, by the way, sorry, I'm lying. Corn Demonkin was later. First, I tried to read the first book of the Dark Eldar trilogy, and uh, reading, to me, getting into Library books was very difficult, and Dark Eldar was one of the reasons why. Because first of all, I'm a speaker of English. English is a second language, like the many of you who listen to this podcast, and I consider my English good. Whether it's really good or just mediocre good, I leave that to you to appraise. But I felt like my English should be enough to be able to read those books comfortably. Mm. The language in those books, the vocabulary used in those books, like from the perspective of a English as a second language sort of reader, you do need to have a dictionary with you, or the possibility or ability to check vocabulary from time to time. On one hand, because it's just, sophisticated vocabulary. On the other, 40K as a setting has a lot of vocabulary that you won't see anywhere else. Like, I don't know, the computer isn't a computer, it's a cogitator, for example, or something like that. And if you read a book in paper and that word doesn't get repeated frequently enough, you get, I don't know, confused. So it was me. I used to get confused. So I didn't get through the first Dark Eldar book. Um, Another thing like that is worth mentioning about Library books, the majority of them, the big ones, the big titles, is they tend to build the plot and the action really slowly. Like they take the time to get there. They are essentially very much about the setting, the world building, the backstory, and you learn to appreciate that the more books you read. But if you are starting your adventure with Black Library and you start with Horus Rising, Jesus, you're going to get bored. And I know I'm not alone in this. And again, bored not in a like in a drop the book and never come back way. It's just that you need resilience to get through like the first half of the book to actually get like proper action and so on to start happening. And it's all good that the world building is necessary. You just need that patience, and at the beginning you don't have it because you expect, a book about space marines is going to have actions like from A to Z. Mm, it's not like that. And the other thing with me picking up Horus Heresy was I had those reservations, like how interesting could a book about space marines be? Like you have essentially clones who are all, and that the first book felt like this. Like the trilogy revolves around Horus, who is the War Master. Like if you haven't read the books, I don't want to spoil it too much. If you've read the books, you know what I'm talking about. But essentially, it's Horus Lupercal picking up the role of the War Master during like the war in the galaxy that his father, the Emperor, was driving, or the driving force behind. The Emperor says, "Yeah, I'm done. I'm going back home. I'm going to be defending Terra or Earth from now on. Horus, you take over. You will be the leader." And the first three books about Horus becoming the leader, leading the crusade throughout the galaxy, and then getting corrupted by chaos. Essentially, this is what the first three books do. And it develops so slowly. If you know the the tabletop game, if you've played Dawn of War, if you've played Space Marine 1 or 2, and that's your starting point for the books, you come into the world of the books with high expectations of that very action happening. But you need to be cognizant of the fact that the Horus Heresy books happened 10,000 years earlier, when the world is different and it doesn't really look like what we know now. So the races are not established that much. The Chaos Gods are not recognized almost at all. So in the Horus Rising or False Gods, you have the descriptions of like Nurgle demons, spawn of chaos kind of entities, but they are not described in any way that closely resembles the demons that you know from the game, from the tabletop game, for example. So those descriptions are, I would say, clumsy to a point where you want to experience, see the or hear the known names, the characters that you're familiar with, but they are not there. Instead, you get like it's like going through the darkness, complete darkness, with your hands outstretched in the front and just touching things and trying to get like familiar shapes and so on. This is essentially how I found the books at the very beginning. But all in all, the books are great. Like they create a fantastic setting. The story is interesting. The character development is good in the first three Heresy books, and then comes so. I don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't listened to this. I strongly recommend that you listen to all three of, or read all three: the Horus Rising, the False Gods, and the Galaxy in Flames. And this is what I'm showing on the screen right now. Then the fourth book, uh, and like it starts when Horus is already corrupted, and how to tell this without spoiling. By the way, let me switch view just for a second. Um, so yeah, I won't. I said that it's not um Ishik, I said that it's not sponsored by Audible. I'm just talking about the books because I find them valuable. So you go away. So the fourth book, The Flight of the Eisenstein. I speak German as well, so for me it's Eisenstein. This picks up where the trilogy ends because the trilogy focuses on Horus and his Luna Wolves, which, by the way, is a chapter that you don't really know, and it doesn't sound familiar, so you don't feel at home at the beginning with the first three books, and then they turn into Sons of Horus for a good reason, and then there is like this big conflict in the galaxy. It explodes, um, and then you get into Flight. By the way, like the whole, and you'll see that the books have a certain pattern. Like whenever a new chapter of Space Marines gets their own book and the chapter is introduced, they hmm, it's the story is usually told in such a way that there is like this lengthy introduction that they are waging a crusade on a planet, and they are accompanied by, and again that's a word that you might not be familiar with, by remembrancers. Remembrancers are humans who travel on the with the Legionis Astartes, and they are there to, as the name suggests, remember, to create memories, to create accounts of the Space Marines, like reuniting. If they meet humans on other planets, because like the humanity is splintered across the galaxies. If they meet humans on other planets and the humans want to join the Empire, great. If they don't, exterminatus, basically. And the same happens to other races. Like if the races don't want to cooperate and so on, even if they want to cooperate, usually they get obliterated and so on. So this is how each and every single book starts, that there is a new chapter, it fights with someone, something happens, and the remembrances are there to also help with this world building and plot building and creation of the story. Sometimes the story is even said or told from the perspective of the remembrancers for the good, but also the bad of the books. But when you get to Flight, Flight was special for me. So Flight of the Eisenstein, because it's about Death Guard, and I have a soft spot for Death Guard. So it picks up where Galaxy in Flames left. So introduces the character of Garo, who, as you will learn later, is an amazing character, one of the best out there. And his story is generally worth following. So it tells his story where he learns about the heresy. He learns that his legion, well, he learns the to whom his Primarch Mortarion and his legion have sworn allegiance to. Again, I'm trying to tell this in such a way that I don't reveal too much, so you can find out for yourself, and I don't spoil the whole book for you. Um, and yeah, and like, it's just so much fun. The character is so well written. All the Death Guard characters are so well written. The action, it's action packed. It's the essence of what the Horus Heresy books should be bringing. It's the essence of what Black Library books should be bringing. So I strongly recommend this one. Don't skip it. Essentially, don't skip any of the first four. Sorry, the first five that I'm mentioning and I am going to mention, because from Flight we move on to a completely well, character-wise, completely unrelated book, which is Fulgrim, which is, again, and this is not only my opinion but also other people's opinion. Fulgrim is another of those books that starts developing really slowly. The world building is extremely slow. You hear a lot about the remembrancers, their little daily routines, and what their life on this Emperor's Children spaceship looks like, and of course their sort of tasks that they do and the way they perform their remembrancer duties are very closely aligned to how the chapter functions. So Emperor's Children want to be the best chapter, they want to be the most elegant, beautiful chapter, and so on. And the remembrancers are artists as well. So they paint, they write poems, and you listen to a lot of that. And it takes time to get through it. But again, once it gets to the action, once it gets to the fights, the encounter with chaos, let's call it like that, and so on, um, they encounter Eldar at some point. It's just at some point it becomes packed to the brim with action, and it doesn't let go of it until the very end. The end has a little twist, which is also great. So, like those 5 books are your entry to the Horus Heresy, and this is something that you should listen to if you want to start the whole series and know what the backstory is. From that point onward, it gets a little bit complicated, and to show you how complicated this is, I'll take you to a website in a moment. But essentially, at this stage, there is no clear uh, way of reading the heresy books. Like, or well, maybe there is like a chronological order, but even if you read or ask on Reddit or get opinions of people, no one is 100% sure what the order of reading actually is. So that's exactly what I did. I went to Reddit and I googled like what after Fulgrim, and if you go to Google and you type that in Google, you'll see that many people ask this question, and there are multiple repeated threads on Reddit as well. Um, the answer is you pick a chapter that excites you and you go with them. So if you're into Alpha Legion, read Legion. If you're into Space Wolves, probably something around Prospero. If you're into Thousand Suns, A Thousand Suns, which is about Prospero and it has Space Wolves. Um, if you're so, and this is where my one of my first learnings about Black Library and Audible kicked in, and a lesson learned. So when you or any of those like sorry, audiobook services, I guess, the way it functions is you get every month for subscribing to it, you get a credit, and you get like for free, and you get to spend that credit on a book. And then once you use it up, you have your credits. If you want more, and trust me, you will want more, you can either buy credits or you can buy a single book for currencies, for money. And be careful with your choices, because or with your research about the books, because I went to Reddit and I started going through the suggested books. So what after Fulgrim, and someone said if you are into World Eaters, which again, um having played what you call it, Corn Demonkin in the past, to an extent I am into World Eaters. So it said go and read uh go and read after Desia or something like that. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. I listened to it, at the beginning of the year or first quarter of the year, so probably not the best pronunciation of that. But this is what it says, and I just went and bought it, and it is about essentially world eaters who were not called world eaters back then, meeting. So like the emperor has found Angron and has reunited him with his legion. And Angren is pissed off because essentially the Emperor came to the planet where Angren was, plucked him from it, leaving all his like gladiator soldiers that he had a strong bond with behind to die. And he just said, "Yeah, you're coming with me. Here's your spaceship. Here's your legion. Enjoy." That's what kind of a father he was. Uh, the sheer fact that he lost his children in space is another testament to his great fatherhood. But uh, yeah, spoiler alert. So after Deshia basically enters at that point where Angren is pissed off in like a chamber in the not yet World Eater spaceship, and World Eater after World Eater are entering that chamber and closing the door behind them to pledge allegiance to Angron and to convince him that they are worthy of being his legion, of being his sons. And he beats the fuck out of them, like every single one of them. He punches them to death, uh, trying to prove to them that they are not worthy and that they are not as good as his gladiator brothers slash soldiers on the planet that he got plucked from. Where? So uh, eventually, Karn shows up and he enters the room and he endures the whole battle and he shows his resilience, shows that he is a worthy son of Angren. Angren gets convinced, blah, blah, blah. The problem with this is it all happens within an hour of listening. Like, I didn't check, and this is the learning. I didn't check how long the audiobook runs. And it turned out that it was like an hour and 12 minutes or something like this. So I essentially spent my credit for an hour of listening, while a standard book, standard audiobook out there is like between 8 to 10, maybe 12 hours. Like Prospero books, the ones that I listened recently to, they were like 12 hours. Good 12 hours of listening. Uh, Yeah, that is like as you say, Ishik. It is short. Like 1 hour is compared to 12. I for a second there I felt like that was a wasted money. It wasn't wasted money because it was a good story. It was well written and so on. So credit to Matthew Farrer for writing it. But in the form of the audiobook, it's just like and it's gone. So I immediately felt hunger for more. Um, the best part of it, you when you listen to the audiobooks, you get the layer of how to call it. You learn more about the legions or your favorite characters than you would like. And with After Deshia, I found out that Karn speaks with a Russian accent, which is the most hilarious thing ever because I would like it would be the last thing to imagine that accent in his like coming from him, but it is what it is. So it takes getting used to, but once you do, it's okay. It's fine. It fits him, but it's weird at the very beginning. So after that, I was immediately hungry for more. So I figured if not World Eaters, then perhaps White Scars. And I'm gonna jump forward a little bit to because there is a bunch of books from Heresy. As I said, I read 49 books throughout the year, so they are not all in this presentation. But I want to tell you something funny. So at some point after listening to the Heresy books in order or in the order that I showed you, you get a little bit tired of Space Marines. So I started because again, like the first Heresy book where you get from like Luna Wolves, the whole story revolves around Garvio Loken, who is an amazing character as well. But the essentially the interactions between Space Marines are brother, I need to avenge you, or avenge me, brother. Let's fight now, brother. Let's cover ourselves in oil and duel in the duelist cage, and stuff like that. And it's like, you fight well, brother. No, you fight well. Well, fucking no surprise if you are just copies of one another. Then yes, you fight well. Great. So you get bored after a while of listening about Space Marines and their honor and whatever. So my thoughts went to the Tao, which I'm showing on the screen right now, and I'm showing the 4 books that I read or listened to about the Tao. And I started with, and I don't know if that was a good choice, but I started with Damocles. There are 2 books about the Damocles Gulf. Damocles, and then I think Blades of Damocles. I didn't get into Blades of Damocles, and there, sorry, there is a reason. Um, Essentially, if you had the possibility to look at the slide, you would see that out of the four books that I read, there is Damocles about the Tao in general, and then there is Farsight. So there are two books about Farsight that I read, and I think only two books about him. And then there is Shadow Sun. Farsight, Crisis of Faith, and Farsight, Empire of Lies. They are, I mean, all those books are written by Phil Kelly, but Farsight books are narrated by Andrew Wincott, who does the Farsight's voice, and Helen McAlpine, who does like female humans in the book, because in every book there is like a female human. And Andrew Wincott as Farsight sounds pretty much like the commander in Tau in Dawn of War sounds. So if you liked playing Tau, that will sound very familiar to you, and that is great. Damocles, however, is read by a gentleman called Shogo Miyakita. So a Asian sounding name. He has brilliant, deep British accent. And when he speaks with that accent, it's amazing. But unfortunately, Damocles tells the story of Tao fighting White Scars. And if you think about it, Tao culturally are derived from Japan, while the White Scars are culturally derived from the Mongolian tribes and like the Mongolian tribes and riding the steppes on horses. So for some reason, and I don't know who signed this off and so on, but Mr. Miyakita does accents, and both the Tau and the White Scars sound like crazy variations of, like, I don't know if you know South Park, and if you remember I don't want this to sound racist, but I didn't do it, they did it. The Chinese guy who is fighting Mongolians with his shitty chicken and his Trojan Mongolian hose. The whole book reads like that. So like you try to get the best sort of content about Tao that is there, because Phil Kelly has the monopoly for writing about the Tao. Whether that's good or bad, that's a separate story, because his descriptions of things are sometimes of dubious quality. Overall, those are very enjoyable books, and Tao is he has his approach to Tao, and you either like it or hate it. I'm sort of on the fence. Um, Shadow Sun is really good. Shadow Sun is fun. Farside is okay. Damocles, I mean, again, you want to enjoy the story. It tells you, uh, it like there are scenes of fighting which are great. The first time when riptides appear, spoiler alert, but like it's Tau, so you can expect Daka Daka. So the first time that riptides appear and they fight against Imperial Knights, and essentially my recollection of that scene when they appear is I remember two things. Firstly, Mr. Miyakita does s- weapon sounds with his mouth. So he goes like, and the Riptide gun goes boom, 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 which is just so fun to listen to. And then the book describes how a Riptide approaches an Imperial Knight from the back and does a German suplex to him, or at least that's how I pictured it in my head when I was listening to it. That's the joy of those audiobooks, that you listen to it, or of books in general, that you listen or read and you get to picture it in your head the way you want. So in my head, the Riptide did a German suplex to the Imperial Knight and sort of like destroyed it, and it was great. So so the books are fun, but the Tau speak Japanese English, and White Scars who come from Chogoris and speak Chogorian. Chogorian sounds like Chinese. So you half of the book is dialogue between people speaking Chinese English and people speaking Japanese English. And whew, it is an experience. So if I can recommend it, it's for the cultural bit and accents. But at the same time, I don't recommend it for the cultural bit and accents because yeah. But there is also, I think it's in the Mockeries, there are like stories about Guevesa. If I remember correctly, Guevesa are people who converted to follow Tao. So like they gave up on the empire, they gave up on the emperor, they joined the Tao, they joined the Tao Va, and they're waging battles on behalf of Tao using Tao war gear and so on. So stories from that perspective are brilliant. And there is a human who tells a story of him talking to one of the water caste who taught him about the Tao ideals and so on. Like the faction storytelling for the Tao told by a human converted to join the Tao Va. Brilliant. Really well done. I want more of that. When we talk about Farside, eh, it's okay. It's not bad, not good. I mean, okay, it's not brilliant, but it's not horrible. There are, like, in the first book, I think he fights against the Ultramarines, and it's fun to see Ultramarines being the baddies. So, and they are really presented like assholes. So it's worth listening or reading just to get a different perspective on the Space Marines. There is chaos involved, so it's really fun. And then the second part is essentially Farsight getting disillusioned about what the ethereals represent and what they do and how they do it, and yeah, fighting for the enclaves, which is interesting in itself. Again, good backstory about the Tau and the Farsight enclaves and so on. Uh, is it the best storytelling Black Library has to offer? Definitely not. So a strong 3 out of 5, I would say, for the Far Side books, and then Shadow Sun by the same author. Oh, by the way, um, there are scenes in Empire of Lies where, like, Farsight appears on two fronts. The whole book at some point feels like the eighth season of Game of Thrones, which I know is not a recommendation, but the eighth season of Game of Thrones, if it was anything, it was fast paced, fast moving, fast changing locations, and so on. And Empire of Lies does that as well. And you have Farsight fighting orcs to then go and fight someone else, but then orcs. And I would say for a Tau book and for a Tau audiobook, Phil Kelly writes better orcs than Tau. Like his orcs are really fun. And then Andrew Wincott, when he reads orcs, you can tell that he's enjoying it. Like this is the better part of the Farside books are the orcs talking and planning and waging war and dropping in their massive asteroids. And for that part, I would even say it's a 4 out of 5, but mainly because of the orcs in the Tau book. Shadow Sun is great as well because I mean, great. Uh, it's very good as well. Shadow Sun uh, it fights chaos, and it's really interesting. It's a very interesting take on the character, and I strongly recommend it. And that's all I'm going to say because not everyone here is interested in Tau. So I'm going to go back to the the Horus Heresy and Primarchs for a moment because that is another line that is there that you might be interested in, which is the Primarchs, and it essentially shows the the backstories of the Primarchs, how they wage war, and so on. And you either learn to appreciate them or not so much. So the two Primarchs books that I got through, one in writing or paperback and one in listening, the paperback was Mortarion, and it shows him leading a death guard, well, his death guard against one of the world's, as I said, Imperium at the time of heresy is splintered across the galaxy. So there are humans on different planets that either want to follow the Imperium or don't want to follow the Imperium. And it's really well described in Legion. Many of the mm, of the human races in space, uh, or those like splinter worlds in space, uh, have already forgotten where they come from. They have forgotten their ties to Terra, and they think that they are even a different species. So when the Emperor comes with his armies, they're like, "Who the fuck are you? Leave us alone! And if you won't leave us alone, we will fight you." And that's the whole thing. So Mortarion and his Death Guard are summoned to a world which is non-compliant, and they are supposed to make it compliant. And they like it shows that Mortarion is not the best strategist in the world. Like he he devises a strategy that is essentially like if you believe probably wrongly that space wolves are just brutal and they just barge in and destroy everything in their way. Wait until you read Mortarion Primarch book. His idea of waging war is even more straightforward, and it's just depressing because I used to play that guard, and to me, Mortarion is one of the coolest looking minis on the table. But if I read a book like this about his strategy of, you know, uh, dropping into a world and conquering it, it's a little bit of a letdown. Jagatai Khan, on the other hand, there is the backstory of him getting his entire space fleet and then fighting against orcs, and how storm calling and the entire um, what do you call it? Like harnessing the warp works with them, and it's really cool. So that one I can strongly recommend. And then since I also play Custodes, um, like the Primarch, or there is an equivalent of Primarchs that focuses on the important characters in the history of Horus Heresy, and there is Valdor. Valdor essentially tells the story of what happened to the Thunder Warriors, and it's okay. It's not an awesome book, but it's an important book in the whole backstory of what happened on Terra. Um, I guess what happened to the Eternity Gate or whatever it's called, and why the Emperor is pissed at Magnus, even though Magnus isn't that much in that book. Um, so, and that's the thing. Like all those books touch upon something from the main story that if you don't read that book, you will get like 70% of the whole story, but then each of them is worth reading to get that one missing percent. I guess that's how it's structured. And it's good. It's good like that. You just if you don't know the order how to read it, you might get lost. To help you with that, there is a site that I found, which is this, and it's called Heresy Omnibus. And this is an amazing page that I found that finally lets you or helps you find your way in um, the whole like heresy story and so on. I'm showing this to you on the screen right now. The link will be in the description because this is probably the healthiest website to approach. I'm going to focus on content by clicking this, I guess. So this is um, the whole omnibus that shows you how to read the books in order, at least when it comes to heresy. So it gives you like Heresy Rising, and then if you scroll, you get like a list of books that are worth your attention, like given in bold, and then there are short stories or other books that contribute to the story but are not essential to get the whole uh the whole story of what is going on. And I appreciate that a lot because it's fantastic, and it does it like one after the other, so you can check up on what each book is about. Like at some point I wanted to focus on space wolves, so essentially the book told me this and this book are about space wolves, go read that. But if you're interested in Alpha Legion, go and read this, and so on. But it has also like this omnibus map, and I'm showing this on the screen right now. So you will see that after this first omnibus, which is like the first 5 books that I mentioned, it turns into a shitstorm. It looks like a complicated graph of multiple storylines and so on. And you just, if you pick any of the books from the middle of this graph, you, you will not know what is going on. Like Probably the book will try to explain where in the whole like time line of the heresy you are. But if you haven't read anything else and you start at a later point, you will definitely be confused. So yeah, as I said, at least read the first five. But the omnibus is amazing, or the heresy omnibus website is amazing. It shows you stages one by one from the heresy rising to the siege of Terra, and this is absolutely something that is worth following because it gives you the essentials. It's like it's a like a blurb at the end of the book. You can essentially look at this and know what the book is about, whether it's worth reading or not, whether it's good or not, because it also gives you insight into like whether the book is actually good or skippable, if that is a word. So that's that. Um, and then I'll just by mentioning the book about Valdor, I'll just mention, if you're interested, all the other books about Custodes. I play Custodes, and maybe a controversial opinion, I didn't enjoy the books that much about Custodes. On one hand, maybe it's difficult to write about Custodes. You you read the books. There is a book about Valerian and Alea, and somebody on Reddit wonderfully summarized those as a book about a Labrador and a Grumpy Cat, because this is essentially what it is. So uh, all the books about the Emperor, about the Eternity Gates, and what have you, I didn't enjoy them that much. I mean, if you're a fan of Admech, potentially, maybe. I'm happy that I know the lore now, but the books weren't a pleasure in like the sheer understanding of, you read a book to enjoy it. The books weren't that enjoyable compared to other books. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they are deeper. It's like the Emperor of Mankind, for example, has a lot of Custodes in it. I didn't love it. There was a lot of like metaphysics in it, a lot of like dream walking in it. That wasn't the kind of storytelling that I enjoyed a lot. So check them out on your own sort of like risk. It might pay off. You might like it. I just didn't. But again, I'm just presenting this to you, and you have to make up your own mind on those. But to me, Custodes in the books, they are not described and shown to what I think is their full potential. The one cool thing is, I can't remember which Custodes book this is. Vaults of Terra, maybe one of those. I can't remember, but there is this book about Gilliman coming back, and I guess like working on the Primaris for the first time, etc. And there is Valerian and Alea, and they fight alongside Grey Knights against demons. That bit was cool, but again, uh, out of all the um, Custodes books, probably this one is a standout. The other ones, I don't know. I just didn't get excited about the Emperor that much. Um, just to conclude with the heresy books, the ones that I believe, excuse me, you should get into are A Thousand Suns and Prospero Burns, which essentially are an interesting set or interesting pair. Sorry, just sore throat. Gonna drink something. Um, this is very interesting because A Thousand Suns and Prospero Burns, they show the same story from two different sides. So the first one, obviously, from the Thousand Suns side. If you are a fan, it's a must. It describes how Prospero works. There are a lot of remembrances there, or a lot of like stories by the remembrancers who are also gifted. So it's a nice twist, and it's cool. Um, and then Prospero Burns, my favorite of the two, tells the story of space wolves. And to be perfectly honest, even though the book is called Prospero Burns, out of, if we assume that it's like a 12-hour listen, Prospero is maybe the last 1.5 hours, maybe the last two. So the rest is about Space Wolves. And it's a good thing if you like Space Wolves. It's a bad thing if you were expecting more Prospero and more Thousand Suns, for example. But it goes back to like A Thousand Suns shows exactly what Nikea was and what Nikea did. Prospero Burns shows that maybe potentially Magnus did do something wrong. I mean, you need to read both, and you shouldn't read A Thousand Suns without. Sorry, you shouldn't read Prospero Burns without A Thousand Suns. Start with A Thousand Suns, and then Legion I'm including on the slide because I started reading it. I'm like 2 hours into it, and I love it, even though I can't really tell for what. Because I guess the introduction of a new character who is John Grammaticus, who is essentially a character that cannot die, and he works for works he cooperates with an organization that is orchestrating everything that happens in the world. That is just, it sounds ridiculous, and it is, but it is also very interesting. But after 2.5 hours, still not much has happened, but it's a book about Alpha Legion, and throughout the 2.5 hours of listening, Alpha Legion appears like 5 or 6 times, and it's cool. So I can't wait for the rest, but this is the one that I'm currently reading. So I can already recommend it, but I don't know how it ends and so on. So I leave it up to you. Um, one of the series that I enjoyed really was, but again, I'm a Space Wolves fan, so I cannot promise that you will enjoy it as well. But it's Space Wolf and Ragnar's Claw, and those are the first two books of the Space Wolf series. And these are maybe a little bit less serious than the books that we have already covered. And this is really cool because it's like a breath of fresh air in a way, because they just show the camaraderie of the space wolves. It's the whole backstory from like, I'm a fisherman on a boat, Ragnar, to I am the apprentice of the Space Wolves, Ragnar, to I am becoming a space marine and meeting Logan Grimnar or stuff like that. So it's like the full backstory. I only read 2 books, but I definitely will read more. But the highlight of the books is at some point Ragnar fights orcs, and he steals an orc buggy or an orc truck and drives it. And you can like it's really well described how he's just having sheer fun from driving an orc buggy, and he comes to the conclusion that now I understand why the orcs like it so much, or something like that, which is amazing storytelling, completely unnecessary. But it's just those little gems and those little diamonds in there that make you love those books even more. Uh, and then we get to probably one of the best, if not the best, series out there, which is Eisenhorn, and the Eisenhorn trilogy, followed by the Magos, which is a collection of short stories that are not that short. They are actually proper, or at least one or two of them are like could be proper books. And then Ravener, which is, or who is, Eisenhorn's apprentice, and he gets his own book. Eisenhorn is an inquisitor, character building, and the best storytelling out there. Like Eisenhorn and his retinue, because over the course of the 3 books, he builds his retinue of like mercenaries and different people that he collected across the galaxy that are cooperating with him. Uh, his interactions with the Inquisition overall, and with different like species of Xenos and demons and so on. Uh, the characters, you start to adore them, and you suffer when they suffer. Like seriously, the book is so absorbing, so convincing, and so well written, and the characters are so well presented that I am definitely going back to those books. It's Indiana Jones in space. So those are like pure adventure books, but each character that Eisenhorn cooperates with or fights against is cool. Like there is no weak spot in those books. This is probably the best that Black Library has to offer. Start with Xenos, go to Malleus, and then Hereticus. Don't expect a whole lot of Space Marines. Don't expect a whole lot of like stuff that you know from other books or from Horus Heresy and so on. This is completely separate. Eisenhorn does his own job, and then he gets punished for it, so to say. Um, and yeah, he has to fight Xenos and Chaos and the Inquisition itself. So it's really cool. And then Ravenor is his student who gets uh, caught up in a tragical accident that essentially leaves him, well, a husk with a functioning super psycho brain, and he gets locked up in a in a space wheelchair, and he is a like he does everything with his brain, with his mind, essentially. And it's like he is Eisenhorn, but more of a psyker. Great as well. I strongly recommend it. So Eisenhorn is a 10 out of 10 and 11 out of 10 even. It's a must read if you want to read Black Library books. I can't imagine not reading this one. And there is one more series that I will talk about in a moment, but I guess this is the time to mention it. All those books, what they, and this is coming back to the burnout that I was talking about at the very beginning, what all those books do, sorry, or what all those books do well is they make you want to 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 get into the fray somehow, and the best way of getting into the fray is by getting the minis. So the Tau books, even though I wasn't like 100% convinced about their quality, made me pick up my first army after returning after a year of a break from the hobby. And the first army that I picked was Tau. So I now have a full Tau army that I picked up mainly because the Tau descriptions in Phil Kelly's books were so good. Like the again, I laughed at this at the sounds that the narrator makes when he reads about the riptides coming into battle for the first time. But at the same time, the imagination of that was so strong that I immediately wanted to own riptides. And I bought the whole army. So kudos, Mr. Kelly. Kudos, Black Library. And then I started reading about Custodes, and I didn't love the books, but I wanted to have Custodes. I read about like Rylanor, I think. So one of the character is locked in the body of a dreadnought, and I just wanted to have a Custodes dreadnought. And now, guess what? I have a Custodes army. And then I started reading about Prospero, and now I want a Space Marines army. Potentially, the fact that Space Marine 2 came out and I'm absolutely in love with that game is another thing. But yeah, I know that I will at some point start collecting a Space Marines army, and it's in great part because of the Horus Heresy books. So yeah, we'll see if Legion convinces me to start collecting Chaos. But for now, I think like Ultramarines sound compelling. Space Wolves, not as much because I don't want to play Cavalry, and I think this is what mainly does it. But one flavor of Space Marines definitely is going to land on my shelf. And then I get to, and this is the last series that I read, and the ones that I like Eisenhorn and this I put on the top of the podium together, and this is those are sorry, and this is an unfinished slide. I didn't manage to put all of the ones that I've listened to on the slide, but Caiaphas Cain, Caiaphas Cain, the um, commissar of Imperial Guard of the Valhallan flavor, who travels the galaxy and becomes the hero even though he believes he did nothing to deserve it, is probably the most hilarious, warm, funny, breaking the fourth wall sort of writing that I have ever read. This is adventure books at its premium, and I absolutely recommend it to everyone. Like every book has him and his Imperial Guard dealing with a different opponent, like different or more than one opponent. Usually some sort of Xenos or Chaos, obviously. And it's just so well written, and also all those books. I mean, the first book is narrated by Stephen Perring, and then the rest of the books are shared between Stephen Perring, who is doing Caiaphas Cain, and I think Penelope Rowlings, who is doing an Inquisitor that he meets along the way, and they complement each other. The whole like you have to start reading from book one because, sorry, the whole series is essentially a chronicle of Caiaphas Cain's achievements, and he starts like as a commissar that gets assigned to a regiment that is in shambles, and he tries to make an army out of them. And then over the course of next books, by accidentally defeating, Xena's armies or something like that, he becomes the hero of the Imperium. But the whole book is essentially a readout from his memorials or his diaries or something or like inquisitorial journals and so on, with editorial notes by a character that Penelope Rowlings reads. But there is, yeah, as I said, it's just there's this is probably the best entry point. I mean, I haven't read like Ghosts yet, and a lot of like Imperial Guard books. These books about Caiaphas Cain make me want to read books about Imperial Guard. I'm afraid of doing that because I don't want to start collecting Imperial Guard. But then this is what the books do. But Caiaphas Cain, his sidekick Jurgen, that always carries his Melta with him, and the whole assortment of other characters. This is comedy in the grimdark world, and like Caiaphas constantly winks at us, constantly breaks the fourth wall, and you feel that he doesn't want to be a hero, but somehow accepts that he is, and it's perfect. It's like perfect adventure writing at its finest, and you have to read at least one. Start with For the Emperor. Uh, it's enchanting. It's like absorbs you from the get go, and then it only gets better. The At the same time, the pattern of how those books develop gets repetitive, but not in a wrong way. Like you feel that Sandy Mitchell, who is the author of the books, has a certain way of writing those books, but it becomes a familiar sight or a familiar welcome thing. That it's like listening to AC/DC albums. All of them are the same, but if you are a fan of AC/DC, you're going to love every single album. If you are not a fan of AC/DC, you probably won't listen to a lot of those albums because they are all the same. Here, it's not so bad. Like every single book has him fighting different Xenos species. There are major like turnarounds and milestones and so on that are important to the story of the entire Imperium. And if you're into Imperial Guard, those are an absolute must. So I read I think no, eight, six of the books, or I listened to six of the books. Stephen Perring's voice is lovely, and I adore listening to Caiaphas Cain read by Stephen Perring, and I am sure you will do too. So yeah, I think yeah, I don't have any other slides. So this was 1.5 hour of me talking about books, but also 1.5 hour of me talking about burnout. I keep mistaking the word burn down with burnout because I burn down is something that I have to deal with in my job right now. But burnout, if I said burn down at any point, I apologize. Um, Essentially, what this whole episode is trying to say, in connection and as continuation of the previous episodes that we recorded about burnout that I will include in the link again, is that if you, especially if you get like, or try to be competitive and trying to be competitive, trying to stay on top, trying to stay up to speed with what is going on, especially now when GW releases detachment after detachment after detachment every single day. If you suffer from burnout because of that, it's perfectly understandable. And there are alternative ways of enjoying the hobby. Great people have put a lot of work into creating the lore for this universe, and I strongly recommend that you give them a chance to convince you that there is more to this game than just competitive play. Um, I mean, this is obvious, right? Many of us, we play for fun. I became sort of enslaved to the concept of competitive play, even though I haven't really achieved anything ever on the table. But the sheer idea of competing, winning, beating someone with my tactics and so on, it's very addictive, but it can also become poisonous at some point. And for me, audiobooks, walking my dogs and listening to audiobooks has become the best part of the hobby. It's better than playing for me individually. It might be different for you, but give the books a chance. I'm not saying use this audiobook provider or that audiobook provider. I'm also not insisting on audiobooks as such because I know that it's not for everyone. Like if you have ADHD or just problems with attention or focusing, maybe this is not for you. I am one of those people, excuse me, one of those people who can listen to an audiobook while driving a car and not cause an accident. But I know my wife, for example, had an issue with that because she has been diagnosed with ADHD, and I know that she has problems focusing and with her attention span. So even though recently it's been much better, and she started listening to audiobooks while cleaning the house and so on, and she says it's fine, it's okay. But if you want to listen to audiobooks in a foreign language and drive a car or do something else, it might be complicated. So if not audiobooks, then paperbacks. I I still believe it is worth giving them a chance because someone has put a lot of effort into building the lore behind our beloved game. So give it a look. And then for other ideas how to deal with burnout, um, make sure that you check out those remaining episodes, those two other episodes that we did with Scary and with Joker, simply about burnout, because this is a topic that comes and back. Sorry, comes goes away and comes back and goes away and returns. Um, and at some point, every single one of us had to deal with it. Recently, I spoke to one of the top Polish players who told me that he is taking a break from the game because actively participating in the WTC and the WTC team has taken its toll and he needs a break. I think there are at least two people who have expressed similar opinion, and I can totally understand that, although from a little bit different perspective because I've never been there competitively, but I can understand how you can reach your limits and how you can need a break. So yeah, I guess I'll conclude here um, with this thought that uh, there are other ways of enjoying the hobby, and watch the other episodes to find out how. Also, if you like what we do, do leave a follow. Do press that little button to know when we go live. But it Joker, when I was away, Joker has set it up as a uh, recurring thing every Thursday at 10 p.m. CET or 9 p.m. UK time. We go live. So make sure that you visit because we try to invent some interesting topics that not that the idea is that we want to do something else than everyone else. So we won't be covering the same topics that StatCheck do. We won't be covering the same topics as Fireside do. We will be focusing on the Polish scene a lot. So, or like tournaments that other people don't talk about. So, yeah, make sure that you subscribe and follow if you are into that and you want to know about other events outside of the UK and the United States. And also, do let me privately know if you are interested in me coming back to that um, theme of Thoughtful Thursdays. So a year ago on Facebook, we tried to do this daily posting, and every day was a different theme. Like there was Meta Monday, and then there was something something Tuesday, and so on. And mine was Thoughtful Thursday, where I talked about things like burnout, but also neurodiversity in the hobby or neurodiversity as a whole. There was a post which was very close to my heart about like focusing on your children on Christmas Day, because it's a Polish tradition that on Christmas Day you work your ass off to make all the preparations and so on, and you forget about the most important people at home, the children. Um, so let me know if you are interested in topics like this, which aren't your usual approach to 40K, but always somehow circle around 40K. And like we did an episode about ADHD with Adam from the Army Painter, and it was like 1.5 hours of just doing a deep dive into what life with ADHD had been, and there were some write-ups and so on. I can make a separate series about topics like that if anyone is interested. Just let me know in the comments, or text me or PM me or write to me on Facebook if you want that, and I will be happy to comply because all those topics are close to my heart. I have members of family with ADHD, autism, Tourette's, and so on. There's a lot of stuff that we can talk about, or a lot of stuff that I can create content about. So I'm open to suggestions. With that, I'll conclude. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it and I didn't bore you to death. I hope that you give Black Library a chance and you find another second bottom, so to say, or another depth in the hobby. And yeah, until next time. Bye.